For those of you who are starting at chapter 3 of this story, I'm Swalwell, an obsessive family historian and one-namer, but I've turned myself into a one-placer too, even though I have yet to register for a one-place study. As the 40-year anniversary of the sale of my childhood home, Holywell Farm, approached in 2022, it seemed an appropriate time to turn my attention from people to place and research the history of the farm I grew up on and see if there was any truth in one of my grandfather's stories. That story was that the water that we drank every day came from the same well as that used by the naughty nuns of Handale Abbey, who had lived there before Henry VIII got rid of their priory. This talk is therefore a brief history of Holywell Farm in South Loftus, North Yorkshire, that has been told in 3 chapters across the course of this event. During the talk, I will share some of the discoveries made and highlight some of the records that I've used to reveal that story. Today, the focus on the community of South Loftus and what can be learnt from them from the court records of the 16th and 18th century. A little geographical context reminder. Loftus lies in the northeast corner of Yorkshire, positioned between the industrial towns of Teesside, for example Middlesbrough, and the goth mecca and fishing town of Whitby. The farm lies in South Loftus, the town of Loftus and its associated amenities lie in the North Loftus area of the Loftus parish. We left chapter 2 of this story with the landlord of the land ensconced within Marshalsea prison for debt, but he was not the only one in the community to find himself in court. This is a list of the cases concerning individuals from Loftus who resorted to the church courts to resolve disputes. I'm sure, given the types of some of the cases described, you will understand why these courts are sometimes known as the bawdy courts too. In 1719, Anne Moore, the rich heiress, and Zachariani's mother, took his father to the church court, which, as the description says, was for payment of expenses and alimony, which can, from the cause papers which can be seen freely online, his parents' marriage does not appear to have been a very happy one at all. There are differences of opinion about religion, but the more serious accusation made by Anne was that she was unsafe. She could not continue living with her husband as he had tried to kill her. She recounts that at a supper being held by the family at Loftus Hall with her husband and a Roman bishop, they conspired to treat her wine with mercury. But after the first couple of sips, she refused to drink any more. But she did become ill. The court took many depositions about this case, which is where the interesting information is found, but they ultimately rejected her case and regarded her as an hysterical woman. However, she did not return home to live with him again, but the cause papers do provide a fascinating commentary on the lives of and relationships of Loftus in the early part of the 18th century. So I turned my attention to another court system, see if there was any further gossip there. I searched the Chancery proceeding on the National Archives Discovery Catalogue for any cases mentioning Loftus. I wasn't expecting to find this many, but more than that, I was not expecting to find a Swalwell listed there some 200 years before my family of Swalwells arrived at Holywell Farm. So I'm going to look at the Swalwell cases and see what we learn from them about the community of South Loftus. For an 18th century wife, Elizabeth Swalwell left quite an imprint on the court records. With the exception of the Swalwell versus Clark case here, she features in all these cases, and those cases reveal a family at war. In the first case, it is her own son who takes her to Chancery. In the second case, it's her stepson who raises a case against her. Then it's the turn of her sister Abigail. And finally, and after her death, it is her children who are fighting amongst each other about the payment of legacies due from their father from 1715, and later legacies due from the estate of Elizabeth and her deceased children, Ambrose and Newark, as well as their half-brother, Witham Wilson. The last case, in terms of Marshall versus Perry, took place 12 years after the death of Elizabeth, but it is here that the details of her funeral, her estate, her spending habits, amongst other things, were found in the master's exhibits. From these cases, it's been possible to put together a family tree covering 6 generations of the Beckwith family, based on the stated relationships within the documents. They also provide breadth to the family tree, as they provide details of Elizabeth's 3 marriages, as well as her own family, the Moons. So the benefit of a warring family to the curious genealogist is an extensive wealth of information, potentially, because not all transfer cases will be as extensive and as complete as this one. The master's exhibits can also reveal some amazing documents that reveal important indicators of the lifestyle, not only for the individuals concerned, but within that society and that community. There are various inventories, which in their detail explained what money was being spent on. There are also receipts from tradesmen for shoes bought for children, for the provision of mourning rings and clothes for various funerals, for medicine, and there were bonds outlining money owed and money due. These are the surnames of the community that appear in various documents across all of Elizabeth's cases. They are the names of the deponents, the names of tenants and under-tenants called as witnesses, servants, neighbours, doctors and apothecaries. They are lenders of money and they are borrowers of money. But it's not just a picture of that community at that point in time, but a collective memory of the community, as the oldest of the village or the parish are called to give witness, or even their descendants are called to give witness on the recall or the veracity of handwriting and signatures in documents that are being presented to the court. Going back to the deeds of the estate records that we found, there are many that relate to sale of land by the Beckwiths and shows a descent and a decline of the estate which they first acquired at shortly after the Reformation. It may have been triggered by their role as royalists through the Civil War and the fact that the parliamentarians summoned them as delinquents, but more research needs to be done on this. But certainly they were the beneficiaries of Henry VIII's closure of Handale Priory for good. When the priory was closed, prioress and 8 nuns were residing there. All of them received a pension and therefore their names are known, but what they did next and their thoughts on that dissolution are not. There is evidence, though, that there is at least a grain of truth in Grandad's story, that the nuns of Handale Abbey were naughty. Certainly, nuns who doubted or broke their vows were sent here to reflect on their faith in this isolated and barren spot. So what would they recognise at that spot today? Well, very little. There are little or no remains of the priory. The landscape has changed. And all there is to mark the spot as a supposed plan of the priory as it would have been, based on the detailed descriptions of the priory in the records made at the dissolution. I'd love to be able to talk to the nuns on the perspective of the accuracy of that plan, but I would even more like to talk about the nuns to find out where they got their water from. It's unlikely that we did share the same well, but at least Grandad had some nugget of truth in his story about the naughty nuns. I would like to thank my sister Carol Craven, the artist of the painting that I've used throughout this. It's my favourite painting because it reminds me of wintry days when ice would form in the inside of windows, and another story that Grandad told me which might be the next one on the investigation list.